Welcome to The Debate. Today, we're diving into the fascinating and, let's be honest, often challenging acoustic landscape of modern communal libraries. These places aren't just quiet halls for books anymore, are they? They've really transformed into vibrant, multifunctional community hubs, hosting everything from silent study to, well, lively children's programs and public events.
Mm-hmm.
This evolution has undeniably created some significant acoustic challenges, and that raises a critical question for designers and librarians alike. Should the acoustic design of contemporary communal libraries primarily prioritize creating distinct, acoustically separated zones for all these varied activities, or should it maybe focus more on reestablishing a pervasive environment that is primarily conducive to quiet study and deep concentration? Now, I'll be making the case for flexible multifunctional acoustic zones, arguing that design simply has to adapt to the modern library's diverse demands.
And I'll be championing the enduring necessity of widespread quiet and concentration. I'll contend that while libraries have certainly evolved, their core function as a sanctuary for focused learning and contemplation, well, it's being fundamentally undermined by a lot of current acoustic design practices. Our discussion today, it draws heavily from some compelling recent research, acoustics in communal libraries, common problems and their solutions. It gives a really detailed look at real-world library acoustics.
Right. So from my perspective, the very nature of a library has undergone a profound transformation. They are fundamentally no longer all about books and silent reading, in the way they perhaps once were. Modern libraries now truly function as vibrant community hubs. I mean, the source material highlights this shift perfectly, noting their use for, quote, group work, meeting people, spending time with friends, and organizing events.
Given this new reality, acoustic design simply must reflect it. The goal, then, isn't to impose some sort of uniform blanket silence across the entire space. Instead, it's about crafting a suitable sonic environment that's tailored for a diverse array of activities. This means acknowledging that the sounds of life, as the paper puts it, are now allowed to be heard within these spaces, whether that's the hum of conversation or the murmur of a study group, or even the, joyful sounds from a children's section. To achieve this, I believe effective acoustic design for these modern spaces should thoughtfully borrow principles from, say, open-plan office acoustics. This involves strategically deploying as much absorption as possible, implementing things like tall screens, and carefully introducing a pleasant background noise spectrum at a high enough level. Now, the purpose here isn't really to add noise for noise's sake, but to subtly mask speech, ensuring that conversations in one zone don't become overly distracting in another. And the research itself, it provides some encouraging examples. You look at the Entrust Library, where the main hall features a ceiling covered in acoustic tiles. This design choice resulted in reverberation times that are actually at the low end of the finish recommendations for that specific type of space. That indicates a well-managed sound environment.
Okay.
Similarly, the Sanajoki Main Library, Apila, successfully demonstrates how distinct sections, like those for youth and music, can, quote, keep their sounds within their own borders, thereby achieving good speech privacy in other, more concentration-focused areas. So these examples, they really show that it's entirely possible to embrace multifunctionality without just sacrificing acoustic quality across the board.
Well, I come at this from a fundamentally different perspective. While it's certainly true that library services have broadened considerably, and I fully support their role as community centers, the research also underscores a critical tension here. These new uses often present, contradictory needs. For many users, the core purpose of a library to offer calm silence and provide a dedicated space for learning, it remains absolutely paramount. And this isn't just some traditional ideal, it's a practical necessity for a lot of people. In our increasingly noisy world, a library often represents a unique sanctuary, offering a kind of silence or focus they might not get anywhere else.
Right.
So my significant concern is that this essential core need is being consistently undermined by widespread acoustic problems across many of these modern designs. The study points directly to staff feedback that consistently reports too much reverberation, restless soundscape, and sounds getting carried too far, especially, they note, from children's or youth sections. This isn't just minor discomfort we're talking about. It's a systemic issue impacting the basic usability for many. Furthermore, the very zonal implementations you advocate for, which are intended to manage sound, well, they are often proving insufficient in practice. The data is quite stark. In Malmi Library, for instance, spreading attenuation is less than 30 dB in the vast majority of the library. Now, just to clarify, spreading attenuation, it measures how much sound levels decrease with distance. A value below 30 decibels across most of a space means that sound, especially speech, remains quite loud and intelligible over really wide areas. This leads to, quote, good speech privacy being achieved only at the other end of the space. Effectively, speech from one area is intelligible almost everywhere else. We see a similar situation in Vihti Communal Library, where the whole library is below the 30 dB attenuation limit, apart from the 3 furthermost spots. This isn't about pleasant background ambience. It's about discernible speech actively interfering with concentration. And it's not just the open spaces. The sound insulation for enclosed rooms is also critically poor. Take Malmi's multi-purpose room, separated by movable glass elements. It registered an RW of only 10 dB. Now, RW is a weighted sound reduction index. It quantifies how well a material blocks airborne sound. A score of 10 dB indicates almost no effective sound insulation, which is miles below the recommended 44 dB for such spaces. This renders the room completely ineffective for containing sound, highlighting a fundamental flaw in design execution when it comes to these multifunctional spaces.
Okay, I understand the concerns you're raising about speech intelligibility, and they are certainly valid points based on that data. However, I believe we need to frame this within the broader context of, well, evolving user expectations. The source material explicitly notes that people have different attitudes and expectations for libraries. Now, to design for a single uniform acoustic environment, a kind of pervasive silence would be unrealistic, and frankly, it would severely limit the library's utility as a dynamic community space. It needs to serve a much wider demographic than just silent readers these days. The challenge, as I see it, is not to control sound in some absolute sense, but to intelligently orchestrate it. This means through thoughtful design, we can accommodate these varied uses within distinct, yet often interconnected zones.
Orchestrate.
Yes, orchestrate. Apala, I think, is a prime example of this orchestration. It successfully demonstrates that relatively separated areas can coexist. Now, while the data does show areas where speech privacy perhaps could be improved, it still manages to provide good speech privacy in many areas further from significant noise sources, like the children's section you mentioned. This isn't about ignoring the need for quiet. It's about strategically placing and acoustically treating spaces to allow different activities to flourish without overly interfering with one another. We can absolutely have both quiet study areas and vibrant community interaction. The key is intentional, multifaceted acoustic planning that acknowledges the diverse needs rather than trying to impose a single, potentially outdated acoustic ideal on what is now a modern, multi-purpose institution.
That's a compelling argument for flexibility, yes. But I think it sidesteps the fundamental problem here. The issue isn't the diversity of use itself. It's the failure to effectively mitigate the inevitable distractions that arise when deep concentration is genuinely needed. The research highlights a critical, almost universal truth about how we hear things. Speech is the most distracting type of signal, full stop. The study even goes on to explain that it can take up to 15-20 minutes to get used to continuous speech, which is just an enormous burden on anyone trying to focus. So when the Speech Transmission Index, or STI, which quantifies how intelligible speech actually is in a given environment, when that remains high across large areas, as we've consistently observed in places like Malmi and Invicti, the ability to concentrate is severely compromised. This directly contradicts the stated needs and wishes from customers for quiet places. It effectively makes libraries unusable for their traditional core function for a significant number of people. Even in Apila, which you hold up as a sort of reference library for multifunctionality, the data shows that good speech privacy from children's sections isn't universal. In fact, areas quite close to that children's section still exhibit pretty high STI values. So if the sounds of life that are allowed to be heard include fully intelligible conversations, bleeding across zones, well then the library is failing a fundamental requirement for many of its users who desperately seek refuge for focused work or immersive reading. It's not just ambient background noise we're talking about here. It's discernible, intrusive speech that actively prevents mental focus. The question isn't whether we can theoretically have both, but whether current design practices are actually delivering on the promise of effective acoustic separation. And the evidence, I think, strongly suggests they are often not.
I appreciate your emphasis on the impact of speech intelligibility, and it's certainly a major design hurdle, no doubt about it. However, I'm not convinced that the widespread shortcomings we see are inherent flaws in the multi-zone concept itself. I think it's more likely issues with the execution of well-established acoustic principles. The study itself provides a pretty clear roadmap for improvements, doesn't it? It emphasizes a large amount of absorption, tall and wide obstacles in the sound's path, and a high enough level of background noise. These aren't exactly experimental solutions. They are known and proven methods to manage sound effectively. We saw in Entris, for example, how strategically placed acoustic tiles effectively reduced reverberation times. That demonstrates these solutions can work when applied properly.
But are they being applied properly often enough?
Well, that's my point. My contention is that the pervasive problems we're seeing are often due to a lack of diligent and comprehensive application of these methods. Perhaps it's driven by budget constraints, or maybe a lack of specialized acoustic consultation during the design phase. Consider the movable walls you cited, which were poorly implemented in Malmi. Yes, an R of only 10 dB is inadequate, I agree. But those elements still offer essential flexibility for multi-purpose rooms. With proper construction, with robust ceiling, and appropriate materials, such movable walls can be designed for much higher sound reduction, reaching up to, say, 40 dB. The potential is clearly there. It's about realizing it through better design and execution, rather than dismissing the concept of flexible zoning entirely just because of current failures. The path to improvement is known. It just needs to be followed rigorously.
I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy that it's merely a matter of diligent application. Let me tell you why. The sheer consistency of these failures across multiple different libraries suggests a more systemic issue to me, not just isolated lapses in judgment here and there. The core problem is that current implementations are failing to meet even basic recommendations consistently. The research explicitly states that most libraries measured were too reverberant, with values often at the high end or even above established guidelines, like RIL 243-2, which is a recognized Finnish standard for acoustic performance in buildings. We're talking about conditions where sound just hangs in the air, doesn't decay quickly, making every little noise much more prominent.
Okay, reverberation is a factor.
It's a major factor, and as we've discussed, sound insulation is critically low across the board. Reading rooms and event spaces, precisely the places where sound containment is most vital, they consistently fall far short of the recommended 44 dB or 52 dB RW. Think about 50's event room again. It relied on screens that do not fill the full height of the room, yielding an abysmal RW of only 8 or 9 dB. These are not minor shortcomings. They represent fundamental design flaws that render spaces basically dysfunctional for their intended use. To suggest these widespread failures are simply a matter of diligent application, I think that overlooks deeper issues in how acoustic design is actually being prioritized and executed in modern library construction and renovation. The flexibility you champion often seems to come at a significant expense to fundamental functional acoustic performance, and we are seeing that cost borne out very clearly in the data.
All right, let's turn our attention then to the role of background noise. Because I believe this is a powerful, yet maybe often misunderstood tool in managing soundscapes in these multifunctional spaces. A pleasant background noise spectrum at a high enough level, for example, the study mentions 40-45 dB A-weighted, as suggested by RIL 243-3, another Finnish standard often referenced for optimal masking. This is a vital, non-intrusive tool for achieving speech privacy.
How so?
Well, it works by effectively reducing the signal-to-noise ratio, the SNR. Just to clarify, the SNR is the ratio of the strength of the signal you don't want to hear clearly, in this case, someone else's distant speech, to the strength of the background noise. So a higher background noise level means a lower SNR for that distant speech, making that speech less intelligible and therefore significantly less distracting. This isn't about adding irritating noise, it's about creating a subtle ambient soundscape, maybe from ventilation systems or carefully introduced sound masking systems that naturally masks intrusive speech from further away. We see a practical demonstration of this, potentially, in Lappeenranta City Library. It had the highest average background noise level among those studied, at 43 dB, and generally, it showed better STI values, meaning lower speech intelligibility further from the source. This indicates the positive effect of that noise masking. It's a sophisticated acoustic strategy, really, that allows diverse zones to exist more harmoniously by making distant speech less intelligible, thereby preserving the ability to concentrate in adjacent areas without requiring complete and often unattainable silence.
Okay, I agree with the theoretical benefit of background noise as a masking agent. Absolutely. But the study's findings reveal a pretty critical gap between that theory and the actual practice on the ground. Despite its vital role, the research found that, quote, in 4 out of the 5 libraries, the level was too low, with average values ranging from a mere 34-37 dBA weighted. Even in Apollo, which, as you said, has some otherwise commendable features, the main hall's background noise was only 33-34 dB. Now, to put this into perspective again, the recommended range for effective masking is 40 to 45 dB. This significant shortfall means that speech is simply not being effectively masked in most of these facilities. And that leads directly to higher intelligibility and increased distraction, exactly as the research clearly states.
So the levels weren't optimal.
They weren't even close in most cases. Relying on insufficient background noise levels for speech privacy is not just a minor oversight. It's a significant contributing factor to the reported restless soundscape problems people are experiencing. The theoretical promise of background noise is completely undermined if the actual implementation falls demonstrably short of recommended levels. It leaves patrons exposed to intrusive, intelligible speech rather than a soothing, masking ambiance. If a critical component of your multi-zone strategy, the background noise, is consistently underutilized or poorly executed, well, it raises serious questions about the viability and effectiveness of the overall approach in real-world application, doesn't it?
Well, I maintain that the path forward for communal libraries still lies in embracing a thoughtfully designed, multi-zoned acoustic approach. While the research clearly highlights areas for significant improvement in current implementations, and look, these improvements are absolutely necessary, I concede that I remain convinced that optimizing absorption, deploying strategic physical barriers, and intelligently managing background sound provide the most viable way for libraries to meet their diverse community needs. The issue, I believe, isn't the concept itself, but the commitment to its proper execution. The study itself calls for a change in attitude towards actively looking for solutions that could improve the situation, and that has to include investing in rigorous acoustic design that aligns with the modern, dynamic role of these vital public spaces.
And I still contend that the persistent systemic challenges identified in this research, particularly concerning speech intelligibility and that woefully inadequate sound insulation across most libraries, underscore a fundamental failure to prioritize the acoustic conditions necessary for quiet study and concentration. Until these core issues are rigorously addressed through robust design that genuinely limits sound spread and reduces speech intelligibility where it needs to be reduced, modern libraries risk losing a critical function that many, many patrons still desperately seek and rely upon. It's not about rejecting dynamism outright, not at all, but ensuring that fundamental, core functions aren't inadvertently compromised by it.
These findings, indeed, underscore that a significant change is needed in attitude, as the paper says. Acoustics is clearly an important part of a library's usability, and it must be integrated much more effectively into both new construction and renovation.
Absolutely. and the detailed measurements provided here give invaluable, undeniable insights into the specific shortcomings that must be rectified if we're serious about fixing this.
Ultimately, the ideal balance between calm silence and the sounds of life in these evolving communal spaces, well, it remains a complex challenge. It's one that requires constant reevaluation and careful consideration. And we hope our discussion today has offered some valuable perspectives for our listeners to weigh for themselves.